Hello, welcome to Artisan Stitch. I'm Jane. Darts are one of the foundation methods of garment construction or fashion sewing. They are used in almost every garment to provide shaping, to dispose of fullness where we don't want it, and to provide a three-dimensional shape on a flat piece of fabric. But they can be a bit tricky to do well. So I'm going to show you now how to sew the perfect dart. Darts are very common on A-line skirts, dresses, trousers. You also get bust darts on dresses and tops. And the principle is much the same regardless of where in the body they appear. So I've prepared my little miniature skirt here. This is the size I used for my tutorials. So this is the back section and it has 2 darts. So I've just cut my paper out. So I'll show you how to mark the darts. Now the old school method was tailor's tacks, but there's actually a much quicker way. So I'm going to take some pins. See, I would do this before I had removed the paper from my pattern. So I'm just going to take a pin and stab through both sides of the fabric. Now, darts should be marked on the wrong side of the fabric, so depending which way you've cut your fabric out, whether it's wrong sides together or right sides together. I'm going to assume here that it's wrong sides together. So I'm just going to peel the layers apart and with my chalk pencil make a little chalk mark there, just across each side of the pin. So I'm going to repeat that process for all the darts. Now, the more accurately you mark your darts, the neater will be the result once the garment is finished. There, so just very small mark. So it's very neat, very accurate and very quick. Far better than tailor's tacks in my opinion. Right, these layers are coming apart. So bring those together. So that's 2 down there. And the first one at the bottom. Now, while I'm doing this, I'll just mention that there are a variety of fabric marking tools. So make sure you use one which is appropriate for the nature of your garment and the type of fabric you're using. My favourites are the chalk pencils because they are slightly waxier and creamier than traditional tailor's chalk. So you get a much neater, more accurate line. They're not as dusty as tailor's chalk, which easily brushes off and smudges. So you get a nice neat line, and yet it does actually come off. These ones are washable. But just check your marking tool on the fabric first. You don't want to be marking particularly all over the front if you were doing, say, buttonholes, and then the markings don't come out your fabric or they leave a stain behind. When I have all my dart dots marked, so 2 on either dart leg, or 1 on each dart leg and 1 on the bottom, I'm then going to line up the dots and just draw the lines in, and that gives you your stitching line. Nothing worse than wiggly darts. Again, you can see the benefit of having a nice sharp marking tool and not a big chunky piece of tailor's chalk, which gives you a much thicker line. We can get a nice neat accurate stitching line. There we go. So now they are ready to be folded. So a process I like to do on the cut edges of garments, particularly where there is a slight curve, so on waistlines of skirts and trousers, necklines and armholes, is something called stay stitching. Now some patterns will tell you to do it at the very beginning, some will tell you to do it later on in the process. I always do it at the beginning, and I do it anyway even if the pattern doesn't tell me. Because what happens is, as you're working away on the darts, you're stitching them, you're pressing them, we have a slight curve on this fabric, and there is potential for the waistline to become distorted. So when you come to put the waistband on, this is all stretched and the waistband doesn't fit. So stay stitching is another one of those very important foundation techniques. So the theory behind stay stitching is that it stays in the garment, as the name suggests. So it is carried out within the seam allowance. So in this case, the seam allowance is 15 millimeters, 1.5 centimeters. So I would do the stay stitching about 12 or 13 millimeters in from the edge of the fabric. So that means when the waistband is attached, you're not going to see the stay stitching. It can stay in place, thereby supporting the waistline of the garment throughout its life. Now, the principle is that you want to stitch from the outside into the centre. Now, this is only half a skirt. This is the back, or one half of the back. So from here we can stitch from the side seam into the centre. If this was the front, which was cut in the fold, we would sew from one side seam into the centre and then stop, flip the garment over and start from the other side and again stitch into the centre. The principle being, I think, to stop so you're not sort of spreading the garment out the way, you're coming in. So to start with this one, I'll need to start on this side, coming from the side seam. So I'm going to find my 50 millimeter mark there and position my fabric just a little inside that. There's no need to do any reversing, and I'm just going to use a regular 2.5 millimeter sized stitch. Stay stitching isn't done using either a smaller or a larger stitch. So I'm just following the cut edge of the fabric as best I can. Slight curvature over the darts. And there is no need to tie off your threads. I'm just going to trim those off to keep them neat. Right, so that is my stay stitching in place. So now I can start folding out my darts. So I'm going to take a piece of fabric. Now the first dart, I'm going to pinch it in the centre, pinch it at the bottom and fold down the middle. Then to make sure the dart is even, I'm going to put a pin in on one line and just check that it comes out on the other side on the line. If it doesn't, just make a small adjustment. So again, I can pin. And there we go. Then if we put the pin back in on the line and it comes back out on the front, then you know you have your dart accurately pinned. So once I've done that, I'm going to put another pin in beside the dart and then remove that one so I can stitch it. and do the same for the other one. Now, because this is a little miniature sample size, it's quite fiddly. And if you find it fiddly to pin both darts at once, then you can pin and sew one dart before you move on to the next, if you have two on one side. There we go. Right. And that way my pin is lying exactly along my dart line, so I'm going to repin that and I can remove that one. Right, now I'm going to sew this. So we're going to start right at the top. Well, I'm actually going to start in a little bit from the fabric and reverse right to the cut edge of the fabric. Then I'm going to come down the line right to the fold. Now when I get to this point here, I want to make sure that by that time the needle is stitching right on the edge of the fabric, and I may even do 1 or 2 stitches beyond that just to make sure that the needle is stitching right on the edge, thereby giving us a beautiful smooth dart. If you come in at too sharp an angle or stop a little bit early and you have a bit of a gap, you'll end up with a little poke of fabric. You've got this strange little peak sticking out right on your hip bone. So I'm going to line up, start with a couple of reverse stitches and then come down following the line. Smoothing my fabric, mark the dot there, so I'm aiming for this dot. Then, to make sure I don't go shooting off the edge too quickly, I'm doing the last 1 or 2 stitches by hand. And the needle is right in on the edge of the fabric. And that's probably 1 or 2 stitches beyond the dot. And there we go. Now when I finish, I'm not back stitching at the bottom. That would create a thick line, which would show when you tried to press the dart open. So I'm going to leave a little tail. There we go, so smooth all the way down. And I've just angled the dart slightly down and it comes just right off the edge of the fabric. So now I'm going to go and press that. So I have stitched my dart. I actually stitched the second one as well. So first thing I'm going to do is to press just over the stitching, and I'm being careful not to go below the dart, because I could create a permanent crease in this fabric. So I'm just going to the dart point, and I've got a nice plenty of steam here. There we go. That's how you can tell I do these videos live with no cuts. Plenty of steam, which opens up the pores of the fabric and lets the thread sink right into it, so that process is called melding. Then darts are always pressed towards the centre, so when it's the back they go towards the centre back, which is the straight edge. You see this is the curved edge, which is the side seam. If it's the front of the garment, they go towards the centre front. So then from the wrong side, I'm just going to use the iron to encourage the dart to lie towards the centre back. Here we go. Again, I'm not going below the dart, I'm just rounding out right on that little point. checking on the front, and you see that's given us the shape. It's now a three-dimensional shape which is going to sit over your hips. Now to finish off, I'm going to take my thread tail, and you can either tie it in a reef knot, or my preferred way is to got an overhand knot. If you tie it round a pin, you can then make sure that the knot lands right at the bottom of the dart. There we go, and then I would snip that off. So there's my two darts stitched and pressed. So that's how you sew waistline darts.